China represents the number one trading partner of the United States, seen as an individual nation. And that's something that has been happening over time. And when you look at Latin America, in most of the countries, China represents the number one or the number two, or at least number three trading partner of most of the countries. And that's also an evolutionary line that we have seen throughout the years. Now, what is interesting to identify is that as it has been happening in the United States, many of the countries in Latin America have tried to increase trade with China in order to be able to close the trade gap that we have identified also over the years. So in trade, that is a challenge. Now, when it comes to investment, and especially in infrastructure, one of the concerns that I have is that when people raise the issue of why Chinese companies are winning so many bids of critical and strategical infrastructure projects in Latin America vis-a-vis the United States, I think it's also interesting to say that there's not a big amount of US companies that are willing to present themselves in those biddings in Latin America. And I think that's something that has to be changed. And it will be interesting that through DFC, the Exim Bank, and other bilateral agencies, we should have more American companies interested in developing a strategic infrastructure in Latin America. Now, saying that, I really want to make a difference between China and Russia, because it's clear that Russia, in the case of Latin America, has been not only supporting dictatorial regimes and oppressive regimes like the regimes in Venezuela or in Nicaragua or in Cuba, but has been participating actively in espionage. I had to basically, as president, to expel 2 Russian agents that were doing espionage in Colombia, as it happened in other European countries. And there's no doubt that in terms of cybersecurity, there's a big risk that Russia will be supporting cyber attacks driven from Latin American countries. And I think those are serious hemispheric security concerns that have to be raised and that require a strong voice of saying to Russia, we're not your playground. Don't you dare to come and try to influence our electoral democratic systems, and don't you dare to try to invade the security of data management. So I think those issues have to be raised, have to be showed to the world, and it also requires the strength of the support of the international community to say no to those behaviors. I think the tragedy of Venezuela is evident. More than 6 million people have left the country. The economy has been absolutely destroyed. And that false sentiment of prosperity in some places has been triggered by narco traffic and illegal activities. And obviously, there is an elite that is enjoying all the flow of money laundering in Venezuela. But actually, the economy is in a very bad shape. And the migration is going to continue. And sadly, I believe many people look at Maduro as a hot potato that nobody wants to handle it. So that's sad, because he's going to use that sentiment of being a hot potato to remain himself in office and try to keep on brutalizing the opposition and consolidating his power. I think the international organizations, the international community, needs to put more pressure on the regime, and obviously needs to put more pressure that there has to be imminent, rapid, trustworthy, with international scrutiny, democratic elections that can guarantee a transition. It's clear that people are fed up, and people are fed up of high levels of inflation, and people are fed up of the deterioration in the value of their assets, and people are fed up of promises that were never accomplished, and people just want to see a change. So I think you are going to see 2 candidates that represent a change. And I'm talking specifically about Milei and Patricia Bullrich. They both represent change. Now, which of both is the most reasonable and obviously the more realistic type of change is something that is going to be taking place in the debates that we will see from now until the day of the elections. And I think that's very important because as polls might reveal today, it is almost clear that there's going to be a second round in which maybe the two front runners are going to be Milei and Patricia Bullrich. What's interesting is that President Lasso, who has been a brave president, he has had to struggle with rising levels of violence, but that has happened because instead of doing what others did in the past, which was to remain silent and try to have below the carpet agreements with armed groups and cartels, he decided to confront them, to dismantle them, to put pressure on them. And obviously, the way they want to get revenge is by trying to create instability and a sentiment of national insecurity. So, what model do I prefer? Definitely, I think the cartels and the criminal organizations have to be fought with the rule of law and law and order. But obviously, I think that's the challenge that Ecuador has ahead. I think Ecuador needs to improve the whole coordination of all the security forces. In my humble opinion, I don't think it's a good thing to have the Ministry of Defense having the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and another ministry having the National Police. I think the Colombian example of having all the forces together with a great level of coordination is much better when you're required to be tougher on organized crime. When I have had to speak about policy, I've done it always in a constructive way. When I have seen that it's important to raise red flags, I've also done it. But I think there's a big worry on multiple fronts. I think there's a clear deterioration in the security of the country. In recent days, the National Association of Enterprises and Companies sent a very troubling letter to the president about the increase of robberies and piracy in the roads of Colombia in order to mobilize industrial goods. We have seen also a deterioration of the fight against narcotics just because most of the eradication has been stopped, and also there is non-commitment from the government to have precision aerial spray, and also most of the operations against narco trafficking have reached record lows. So all that has now impacted in having more illegal crops and obviously more coca is less peace in the case of Colombia. Well, as you know, I have devoted to the environmental cause almost all my career. Although I have been working in development finance and in public policy, most of my work has also been related to conservation and climate action. And during my presidency, I was able to work hard to get Colombia to pass from 13% to more than 30% declared protected areas in the whole country, including maritime and on-land territory. But I was also a promoter of the energy transition, literally passing from 0.2% of the energy matrix in non-conventional renewables to put Colombia into the road to reach almost 15% by the end of next year. The world needs to understand that without a clear contention and putting an end to deforestation in the Amazon is going to be more difficult and maybe impossible for the world to reach our global NDCs by 2030 and to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And what is evident is that the Amazon has lost in the last 4 decades the equivalent of the size of France and Germany together due to deforestation. And if we don't bring those numbers to zero as fast as possible, maybe the Amazon will no longer be a content wall of emissions, but instead will become a net emitter.